Hey groupers, Pastor Marshall here. Hope that you're excited about our study of the book of Colossians. Colossians chapter 1 obviously starts off with this phrase that Jesus is the image of God. Is there a picture of you that is your favorite around your house, that you think represents you the best? And by a great image, I mean it doesn't flatter you. I mean that you actually think that's what I look like. That's really who I am. I have a photo of Claudia and me at her 25th high school reunion that's in my office, and I think both of us look just like we look. I think it's a good photo. On the other hand, Claudia has this photo of me on the beach. I think we were in North Carolina, and the way that I'm sitting and I have my arms crossed, it just makes me look a lot buffer than I really am. She loves this photo. I don't like this photo. I think it's a good rendition of me. What about you? Is there a picture that you think captures you? And then maybe is there a photo that is around your house that you think, well, that's just not what I look like? Well, in Colossians in verse 15, Paul says that Jesus is the image of the invisible God. How would you explain this to someone? How would you explain what we as Christians believe about Jesus and his deity? How would you explain that Jesus is divine to someone? What might you say in response to someone who thought that this claim was ridiculous? How do you answer someone who says Jesus was just a human being and you've made more out of him than you should have? Why do you think that someone would consider this passage to be so outrageous? What are the outrageous claims in this passage? Make a list of them in your small group. In verse 17, Paul says that Jesus holds all things together. So we would say that Jesus is the sustainer. How should this knowledge change the way that you view Jesus? And how should this knowledge change the way that you view the universe that we live in? If Jesus is the sustainer, what does that change in the way that we treat the universe? Well, in verse 17, Paul also brings the church into the passage. How do you feel about the significance of the church in the world? How do you feel about the significance of our church and our community? If our church was missing, what would our community be missing? And if the church, now this isn't going to happen, Jesus has made it clear that the gates of Hades will not prevail against the church. But if the church was missing, how would it affect the world? How would you explain next to a non-believer why Jesus had to become a living, breathing human being? Understand, there's two sides of this coin. We first started talking about how would you explain that Jesus is divine? Second, how would you explain why he had to become a human being, a living, breathing human being in order to save us? As a group, spend some time coming up with a good plan for this conversation. What would a conversation look like with someone to explain why Jesus had to be a human being? I would love to hear about that conversation. If your small group leader would send me sort of this is what we decided would be a great conversation, I would love that. I would benefit from that. Well then, finally, in verse 20, Paul says that Jesus' death reconciled us to God, or that Jesus' death made peace with God on our behalf, for us. How does Jesus' death make peace? That's the question. How does Jesus' death make peace? And would people find that claim offensive today? Certainly Paul writes in Corinth that Jesus' death on the cross was offensive to the Jews and it was a stumbling block to the Gentiles. Would Jesus' death on the cross as our peace offering be offensive to our world today? Well, I just want to remind you of your application every week. Just try to remind you midweek for many of you in these Bible studies. Do you believe that Jesus is the universal forgiver, that he forgives everything? And if he does, is there something that you have done that you still are holding on to, still worrying about, still think that God is holding it against you? Your application this week is to spend a little time with God and just saying to him, I believe you, Jesus. I believe that you are God. I believe that you were man. I believe that you died in my place to take all of my sins. And so this one or this time in my life that I'm holding on to and I'm just thinking that God is holding it against me, I'm ready to give that to him. I'm ready to believe in his universal forgiveness. Well, I hope that you have a dynamite study of Colossians. This is a great book. We're going to be digging deep over the next 6 weeks. Dig with me. God bless.